I'm with you.
Okay, let's go ahead and call the meeting to order.
Amanda,
Here.
Doug, Erica,
Here.
Aaron,
Here.
Tammy, Tim, Rob,
Here.
Michael, Jamie. Here.
All right, we have agenda approval from the November meeting. Did everybody get a chance to look that over? Get a motion to approve that?
I'll make a motion.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We need the minutes from the October meeting approved. A motion to approve that?
Make a motion.
Second.
A second.
All in favor? Any opposed? No. All right. And that brings us to public comment. Do we have anybody here for public comment? Old business? No old business today. New business. It looks like we have the North River Arts and Culture Plan here with us.
And I think Tava's gonna take it from here on the presentation, but I think this plan is just something I think the group wanted to present to the Downtown Square Commission. I think they're just looking to get feedback, but I will hand it off to her and have her explain everything.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Again, yes, I'm Tiva Dawson. I'm with Group Creative Services. We are consultants that were hired to do an arts and culture plan for what they call North River, which is essentially Northern Warren County. The city of Indianola, Carlisle, Norwalk got together, pooled their funds to do kind of a regional arts and culture plan. We're here today because a chunk of our recommendations talk about the square. And so we wanted to be able to loop you guys in and get your feedback as well. I'm just gonna cover today the recommendations for the region as a whole, as well as specific recommendations for Indianola. Just know that the plan also speaks to specifics for Norwalk and Carlisle, which I think your agenda item had a link to the full plan. There we go. So again, the role of arts and culture plans, we really feel like arts are there to amplify the unique assets of communities and to be able to help drive the civic issues forward. So we really feel like art should be an integral part of how communities are flourishing and what makes them feel like bright places to live. So again, we want to have a sense of a shared culture, both across the region and as a community. Defining arts and culture, a lot of times when I talk about like public art, immediately everyone's like murals or sculptures. And yes, it can include that, but it can be so much more than that. It can be permanent and temporary. It can be integrated into infrastructure. It can be events-based. It's not just about visual arts, it's about performing arts. You have the opera here, certainly good examples of a variety of types of art. So we want to make sure people are thinking broadly when we talk about arts and culture. We also don't just talk about arts, we also want to make sure we're talking about culture. That's really, those things are kind of hand in hand. I should think a second before I need to move it because it's got a little delay. So again, we're really looking at something that's collaborative. It builds community. It makes places attractive. It makes places where people want to shop at your stores, right? So we want to find things that are engaging for communities. So when we started this out, they requested a regional plan, but the more we got into it, you guys probably will feel this too. It doesn't, North River, this Northern Warren County, kind of you guys north, it doesn't necessarily operate like a region. There's not necessarily anything that brings Norwalk folks here, maybe to go to the courthouse, but so it wasn't necessarily a regional identity. When you think Madison County, you think covered bridges, right? So there wasn't already a sense of a shared culture or even a shared sense of like community. So we struggled, to try and help with that. And so we're highlighting what we think are some key opportunities to work together as a region. It certainly seems like as chambers you already are from a business perspective, but looking at ways of strengthening some of those things. So we have some regional strategies that work both in all communities or as a region together. One of the things, again, we really feel like is important is that as you move forward, looking at arts and culture, you're not just making something up that happened to work in some other city and like, let's go do that here. It's like, what is authentic to this community that we want to amplify? People want to live where some place feels distinct. So what are your distinct assets as a region? Certainly because of the glacier, you guys have rolling hills. You guys are Grant Woods-like compared to the rest of the metro. You have amazing green spaces here, a couple of state parks, great trails, your conservation parks. They're just a wonderful asset that not everyone gets to claim. You have diverse agriculture. So even beyond corn and soybeans, you've got lots of horses and wineries and berry patches. Those are unique things to lift up. Your edge of metro, but you get to enjoy a sense of small town feel as well, while people who live here can still access metro amenities. And a lot of people might roll their eyes when they hear hot air balloons, but you guys, as a region, not just as a city, have kind of the highest per capita number of pilots than I would, for sure, the state, maybe even, it could go beyond that state. So it is, a very unique asset that I still think has yet to maybe be played out fully. So all of the communities that when we interviewed folks were talking about how important their main streets are, how important the square is and the merchants in those squares and supporting those local merchants. So we really feel like a key goal is how to bring the arts in to advance the economic development for you all. One of those recommendations for that goal, if you look in the plan, I encourage you to look in the plan because we have a ton of hyperlinks. You can go down lots of rabbit holes because when we give it, we try and give lots of examples and get you to places that show you more on that example. So I'm giving you this like high level today, just know there's a lot more written in the plan. But we think that there should be an annual stipend for arts activation integration to support the small businesses on, I'm just referring to as main streets. Those activations could be as simple as something temporary. You could have artists come in and do window displays. Artists could come in and do demonstrations, pottery demonstrations, right? There could be, so looking at what are both temporary and permanent activations that could support what's happening, and it could be seasonal as well. Regional identity, rather than hiring someone for branding for the regional identity, just get artists on the job to start to create that sense of vibe. So doing art activations around those key assets wouldn't be another one. Celebrating ballooning year round. Doesn't have to just be when there's a hot air balloon festival. We actually brought in some of your pilots to downtown Des Moines a couple of years ago in the winter to do a hot air balloon hunt. I think it was January. It was cold. But there was lots of families that came down, and what do they do when they come down for the hot air balloon hunt? They stay for pizza, right? So they're trying to use the arts and culture as a way to activate economic development. We think there's a lot more that could be done on the hot air balloons. Looking at as communities work towards infrastructure projects, integration of art into all of those. So stairs don't have to just be another set of concrete steps, right? Playgrounds, all of the things that we as cities and counties invest money in can always have a little bit of distinction, and looking for ways of making sure that gets integrated. Placemaking in parks and trails, again, you got amazing parks and trails, making sure that they feel like destinations. Your disc golf course here is national tournaments. Get that thing on Instagram. Make a spot where people are tempted to take a picture, and now you guys are all over the place, and because of some unique little visual that you that you created there. Temporary activations, I don't know if I've got a picture here. Nope. Are also really fun. If you know Waterworks Park in Des Moines, it's a huge park. We helped them with a very simple activation of glass egg hunt. So we had a local glass artist make 500 glass eggs. We hid them in the park with volunteer support, and there were just droves of people who came out to look for those eggs, to find one of them. And it really got people off the paved trails out into reaches of the parks that normally people wouldn't explore. So things can be fairly easy, fairly temporary, and boom, you've got, I mean, they had media coverage in Davenport about that activation. And again, looking for distinction as these places are developed. advocating for them to be developed in distinct ways. And all the infrastructure. So the parks can be unique, and also just trails. So as trails are being built, it's not just assuming, I mean, they have to be more than just a paved trail, right? People want to feel like it's an experience. Sometimes that experience might be finding the cute pub at the end of the trail and getting there to the brewery. Or it could be finding the little, this one's in the Northwest, I think it's called like a salmon backbone to it. So they're playing off of their local feel of fish and making a distinct bridge there. So it might be, for kids, they need different kinds of experiences along a trail, but trails should have a sense of experiences to them. You have beautiful greenways around those rivers that the county is already working on. Really looking at, maybe your theme could look at land art. Not a lot of folks are doing that. If you know Andy Goldsworthy, he's kind of the quintessential land art person who just does fun things out of colored leaves or rocks. Some folks in Arkansas are doing interesting light installations in their parks. Again, huge turnout for those. But also bringing the rivers to town. You have beautiful rivers. More and more in central Iowa, they're celebrating water trails. You've got those, you can bring that theme of those rivers even into your public spaces. We're recommending, this may seem kind of far out, but I don't think it will be, I'm hoping. End-to-end walking. So it's common in Europe for people to do end-to-end walking. There's more of it growing in the United States, for sure, not that much in the Midwest. But your towns are not that far from each other. People will do day-long walks, 8 miles to 15 miles. And then they just get there and they'll do it from end to end. So someone will just taxi their luggage to the next place. It could be a long weekend for people to get out, do 3 days of walks, get a chance to stay at a couple of bed and breakfasts. Someone prepares their lunch for the next day and they just take a backpack enough for that. And maybe they're visiting a winery along the path or a pottery or your shops downtown, right, as they come along there. It is not a type of recreation activity we've really done much. Like, we do a lot for bikers, we don't do much for walkers, and I think it's kind of a niche activity. And because of your rolling hills, you just got prime land, I think, to do that. And just cute towns to show off as well. The part of that, it's really a long-term vision, is starting to plot the path of what that might look like. And then just creating more opportunities for local artists. So the North River Arts Council is who commissioned us to do this work. And they're really weaving together a lot of the local artists in Warren County. And they are your place to start to connect with some of those artists should you want to do something interesting in those shops. And what we're also recommending is, rather than traditional gallery spaces for those artists to show their work, is looking at unconventional galleries. Veterinarian lobbies have walls. Coffee shop, I know your coffee shop here, I can't remember the name of it, already showcases local artwork. Are there more places like that have spaces and walls that would be willing to rotate their artwork to show off the work of local artists? And maybe you just do it for 3 months out of the year when it's less busy, maybe January, February, March, when you're really looking to drive extra business into some of the merchant places and connect with local artists as well. And then formalizing the role of the Arts Council, so we kind of speak to the ways in which they could support the work throughout Northern Warren County. So for you all specifically, for each community, we really tried to look at 2 to 3 areas of concentration. Like, there's so much you can do. Let's figure out where we can focus. And we heard a lot about your square. Like, the good and the bad. I'm sure you can imagine all of the heart-wrenching, like, folks that are still talking about the courthouse and all of that. And then with a couple other goals there. So again, trying to lift up from what we already knew. Are you guys familiar with the Wonder on Buxton? So yes, okay. So we wanted to acknowledge that all of that was already in motion and to encourage moving that forward, all of those concepts. So we speak to that in here. And we also just call Reboot the Town Square. You guys are still, I think, maybe you can tell me, but it feels like it's still kind of coming out of major construction mode, street closures. So how can it continue to get enlivened as it's getting reboot? So some of it is, it's your vital location. It's a great place of beauty and vitality. And how can the arts continue to be a tool in your toolbox to advance that as a goal, as a focal point? One of them is, so we have a suggestion of, just in general, spectacle in downtown, and to the extent that you can start to use the courthouse for some of that. This is fabric. This gal, the artist, is linked in the plan. She does castles with fabric, amazing amount of it seems impossible to be able to put fabric over an entire building until you watch all the things that she's done. Our recommendation though is the balloonists retire their balloons pretty quickly. There's a short lifespan on that fabric. And you also have a ton of quilters in this community. So we were recommending a giant quilt off with leftover fabric that could then, for a few weeks out of the summer, be put over the courthouse as this spectacle. I am a good example of somebody, I every year come down to the Hot Air Balloon Festival. I come down to the county fair. It's the best county fair, but I don't necessarily get pulled into the town square. So I want to find spectacles that brings folks like me who have an interest in the Hot Air Balloon Festival to want to go see the kooky thing that you guys did in the square this year. So that's what we're trying to offer. It could be anything, but mostly just how can you start to pull in those themes of what people, and I've been to the opera, again, can go to the opera without ever coming to see your square. So we just kind of labeled it Cows in the Square with the idea of you have some signature events in the summer and making sure that maybe you have a sense of a tie of those events. So someone, I think when we did a community input, they said they had done cow pie bingo, which I thought was hilarious. And they did it as a fundraiser. I'd never heard of it, but just adding that. There's several examples in the plan around this. One of them also being seeing if the opera singers would perform music that was written and lyrics written by kids from the local schools here. So continue how to weave people into those events. The other opportunity is esports. I barely know what I'm talking about here, but enough to know Simpson has scholarships around esports. Who does esports? Do anybody know? So it's essentially it's digital sports competitions. And there's already students at Simpson that do this. And we think having an actual outdoor projection of them in live competition mode would bring a whole different group of people down to your square to see that. And you have them right here. Continue to work on the courthouse. How that building looks doesn't have to be the end of the story yet. There's lots of examples of facades that can continue to be added. You could look at mosaics. It's a very traditional, trying to mimic that very historic look of the square. There's opportunities for the buildings to start to head that direction as well, which could also be phased in over time. Refining identity, we heard a lot about the mascot, and we're not necessarily saying that yes or no to the mascot. We're just saying maybe you can engage artists to help the community continue to envision what you could move towards, and just to engage artists in that. And it could be kids art as well, to sort of see what themes might be important, what might you be able to move towards. And arts for everyone. We heard there's a lot of civic organizations in Indianola, more than I think the other communities that, as we were doing interviews. It's interesting to kind of get the unique feel to each community. And there's just a lot of Rotary groups and that sort of civic layer here. And we also heard, we've heard from artists that are in Des Moines now who grew up here, and they said they would just want to make sure that kids feel like they have a sense of hope and that they feel like they have a sense of belonging. And for them, it was the arts in Indianola that made them do that, made them feel that way. So to the extent that arts programming can continue to happen and happen on different levels. So the one that we reference in Des Moines is an after-school arts program. It actually was started by a church to make sure that kids with limited access to the arts were able to have after-school programs. And churches raise money, they hired artists, they go into after-school programs. That's a really good model that could be looked at here. And there's, again, lots of quilters here. You guys are at Stop, you probably already know this, a Stop on this Iowa quilting tour, what's it called?
I don't know, but people do come in for
People
that.
come in for it.
Because we have a quilt shop too on the side.
Yes. That's why I just think the quilting of the thing for the courthouse would just be amazing. but also looking at cross-generational fiber arts. There are kids getting into quilting, but they're expressing something different than maybe what their grandmothers were expressing on their quilts. But there is a skill set to be shared and how to start to look at cross-generational connection there. Let the youth lead to the extent that youth continue to feel like they have a vital role in your community. Maybe they're docents for the opera. Like, what are the ways in which they can become more integrated and lead in the community? And then capitalize on upcoming investments. This is partly kind of a policy recommendation for the city of Indianola. It's saying that whenever there are certain level of capital projects, that there's some level of commitment to look at some concept development for how it could be a more distinctive project where artists have a role to play and how that might look. So looking at some systemic integration there within city process. Next steps is we're moving through each city, looking towards adoption. So I think later on this month, I can't remember your council date, but we'll be going to council as well to present the final plan. Full plans on the North River Arts Council. It's also linked in your agenda. Here for feedback.
Well, in the very beginning of your presentation, where I think we're missing some of that fun art and the painted sidewalks and stuff like that, is definitely our fairgrounds, and then the pool in the summer where all the kids go. That doesn't bring people to the square, but I definitely feel like that's where we're missing some of that
Pop.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that pop. I know there's a group trying really hard to get a new playground at the fairgrounds right now too. Is that the Indianola Youth Council?
And that's very much needed. That
Yeah,
playground is
Yeah.
wood and a lot of splinters.
We do have a section where when we talk about getting concepts for art integration, we talk about the high school remodel would be a good chance. So we can continue to list some other opportunities like that.
Yeah, lots of kids walk in this town. Lots of kids walk to the high school. Lots of kids walk to the pool during the summer.
I really like the idea of the balloon fabric like over the courthouse, and kind of, I think it would be a positive spin on, you know, the size of the building, but look what we can do with the size of the building.
Yep.
I think that would be fun.
Yeah.
So the Wonder on Buxton project, is there like a final plan that we can see for that we will propose to the council, or where is that?
We just speak to it as a thing that's happening and are echoing to make sure it moves forward. We're not as intimately involved in the planning of that. We did help them come up with concepts. There is a group, the Hometown Pride group is still moving forward on that. And they submitted, I know, a grant, a Great Places grant, November 1, it was due. And I think by the end of this year, they'll know what's getting funded. So probably by the end of the year, they'll have more sense of how they're moving forward and what specific things are happening. Yeah, it does call for some things like decorative screening in the parking lot by the county building there, and some engagement along the sidewalk concepts. Have you seen any of it?
Yeah.
We did,
Okay.
we saw, it was probably what, August or September when we saw
Okay.
some of the early plan.
Right, some things fold out and some things moved forward, I think, more quickly.
Yeah. I think it sounds fun. I think it'd be.
Mhm.
So what are you actually like presenting to city council for approval then? By
The
city
plan.
council? What would Indianola be considering then?
Uh,
The full plan?
Mhm.
Implementing the full plan? So
Yeah,
everything you
We're
presented
really clear
today-
with, like, it is a plan for the community. So some things, like the mascot, for instance, probably is not best for the city government to take on, but we heard it in our input. And so we wanted to make sure that it was being echoed back to the community as something that was important. But that may be, so it's not that necessarily that all things are city government related. It is a plan for the community. Just like, you know, putting something over the courthouse may have nothing to do with the city. Maybe you guys that say you want it and you're working directly with the county staff, right? So it's just, but they're the ones that paid us to do the plan, so we will go back to them for the presentation of the plan.
And it's sort of presenting and saying, yes, we want to make an investment in doing it, not
nothing of like a exact example.
We
From what
say
you
these
see.
are opportunities.
Right, okay.
Right? Yep.
Yeah.
And not, I mean, as is the case with all things, hopefully it's narrowing the field of possibilities. I mean, you guys could say, we want to paint the grain elevators, right? There's a million things we could have recommended for you. And at some point it's, what we heard was your square is important. You're still like, getting rejuvenated there. That's where we wanted to make sure we were putting some emphasis on recommendations. So that's partly what it is providing some focus and spurring ideas of the potential of what you could do, both temporary and permanent, and then some policies and systems to get into place to make them more consistent versus like we did a mural and then we did another mural. Well, how do we make this a more consistent approach to how we're going to enliven spaces?
Or like a strategy behind it, so
Yes.
it doesn't just become sporadic projects all over.
exactly.
Love it.
Yep.
Love it.
One opportunity that I think we miss here in town is that there's so many baseball and softball tournaments at Pickard Park. Because I have people come into my store all the time that are just killing time between games. And I've mentioned something to Doug Byland about it. I'd love to have something out there that leads people to our square. I mean, some find it on their own and come to have restaurants, but I think that's a golden opportunity for us to, there's people from all over that come.
The amount of
Yeah.
traffic that we have through Indianola from baseball and softball tournaments
It's
is
huge.
I mean, I think it's by volumes more than maybe Ankeny would beat us in the traffic, but I mean, we have so many
do.
baseball and softball teams.
And as I
And
headed
it's,
to
and
town,
it's spring and fall, because my daughter
Right.
does all that.
Spring, fall,
It's,
summer.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're
Yes.
March through October.
and even basketball tournaments bring people too. So I know we have a lot of tournaments at the Blake Fieldhouse for IBA and such. And I mean, that's probably collaborating with the schools, but I just think it's important to grab
Yeah.
those people
Yeah.
while they're killing time and,
Right.
want to spend money.
That's great. We'll see if we can weave more of those connections in.
Thank you.
Or it's having the art represented on the square somewhere to hopefully get them from Pickard Park to
Yeah.
the square. Yeah. How that'll work.
That's a little bit what we did with Carlisle. Like Carlisle has a lot of people going through it on Highway 5, but you don't necessarily in like one block off and then you can get their little main street. But if you're flying down Highway 5, and so, we were essentially saying it's like those old timey, Strawberry Point has a big giant strawberry, like and there's a word for those. But sometimes you just need, again, the spectacle, like a list. I mean, we do it in Minnesota when you want to find the blue ox or, like the huge thing is that you just want to like, well, we heard there's this thing over there. We just want to turn off and go find it. Right. So just making sure there's those sort of things that people just intrigue. The discovery is fun.
I think painting the water tower to look like a balloon would be fun because it's kind of shaped like a balloon a little bit. And since we're so known for balloons, I just think
Or
that
at
would
least
be
in
something.
your checker pattern sometimes that they have or something like that.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
We're lucky that balloons go with both our history of Indianola and the modern direction that we're taking. It's easy to play with balloons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're just so like,
It's so fun.
right.
You don't get tired.
Right.
of
I
them.
mean, right. There's nothing controversial about
Yeah.
them. There's no good or bad. I mean, yes, they're
Yeah.
just,
You
they
can
flo-
live here forever. If you see a balloon in the sky, you're like, oh my gosh,
Yes.
it's a balloon.
yeah. And I tell you, like, folks from the urban metro just need more connection, I think, to that all as well throughout the year. Thank you. If you have any other
you.
feedback, let me know. Charlie knows how to get a hold of me. If you have any other thoughts, otherwise let's still go to council. And I think also maybe just, I don't know the interaction you have with the arts committee, but continuing to, I think, maybe connect with them for like how different aspects of it get implemented will be important as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
you.
you.
Forward, it looks like our next item is the downtown design guidelines.
Okay, so at our previous meetings, we had talked about past facade improvement programs that the city had offered, and then the future application process for when our next program is launched again. We also briefly discussed the downtown design guideline goals and intent and the purpose of it. And kind of came to the senses of that we want to preserve like the character and the overall feel of the downtown area. So today we're kind of just going to focus on the downtown design guidelines more in depth. So this is just an overview of the guidelines as a whole. It articulates a specific vision in the downtown area with the goal of preserving the historical character of buildings, creating a unified design while maintaining a diverse type of buildings, enhancing visual appeal and aesthetics, and then also promoting tourism and activity in the square. The draft chapters are shown on the side, but we're gonna primarily talk about the planning and designing your project chapter. So this chapter just it serves as a guidance for new construction, but also for enhancing the appearance of existing buildings in the downtown area. There are several chapters within this that discusses like a range of items like outdoor accessories, so outdoor seating areas, trash enclosures, to the scale and orientation of a building if you're doing new construction or additions to a building. So this chapter introduces facade anatomy. So this just essentially points out what the different names and common materials are for buildings on our square. So this includes the windowsills, lintels, transom windows, display windows, knee walls, just to provide names to these items that maybe most people don't know, but then also provide what materials they're commonly made of as well. The section also, or this chapter also introduces looking at projects on buildings as a big picture as opposed to doing many small different improvements or renovations. And so this just encourages property owners to take a step back and look at the overall needs of their building. And this is mostly encouraged because larger projects can get grant funding and financial assistance for the larger the project is. So, but to start, the design guidelines does encourage open concept storefronts, and then also reopening and restoring transoms for buildings. So that means increasing the overall glass on the first level storefront area to allow pedestrians to look in. If it's not, if the building isn't, if it has a use that might not be compatible with that, it encourages using alternatives such as internal shades. So you keep that glass look for future, for the future if that use were ever to change, but you still get that privacy on that street level. It does discourage certain building materials, and we will get into that later in the presentation, but then also painting brick or using inexpensive building materials. Outdoor accessories such as on furniture items, and then any auxiliary functions that occur outside of the building framework. So that includes the seating areas to waste collection systems such as like trash cans. It encourages screening waste collections. So maybe having like a fence or some sort of landscaping around trash enclosures, so they're not just out there. It also just encourages the use of inexpensive or non-durable furniture items such as plastic or metal folding chairs. The signage section encourages signage that complements the existing building. It also encourages designing your signage to a pedestrian scale rather than automobile scale, so they're more designed for someone that's walking on the street rather than someone driving through the square. It does discourage blocking ADA accessible routes with sidewalks and sidewalk signage. So that's just the A-frame signs in the middle of the sidewalk. Just making sure that there's a minimum amount of clearance, so that way those with wheelchairs can get around. And then the scale and orientation. This section just touches on mostly new construction and then also additions to buildings. So it discourages having, inconsistencies between buildings. So that's setbacks, heights, having exposed roof lines. This example on the screen on the lower right is from Ottumwa. And so you can see there's a different setback from where the original buildings are. You can see the roof line. It's also way shorter than the neighboring buildings as well. So it doesn't really flow or have that same character or feel that the two buildings on the opposite sides do. The ADA accessible spaces section just encourages removing any architectural barriers that might prevent employees or visitors with disabilities in partaking services and activities within a business. It also provides resources and information regarding tax incentives. So there are federal tax incentives for just bringing historic properties up to code. And so it just really serves as a resource to finding those incentives. Building murals and alleyway activation. This section just encourages using public art make and any other improvements to alleyways, and then within the square to really just make like the downtown area. And then it also encourages working with city staff to create a general comprehensive plan within an alleyway. So that way we have one consistent unified design for it, and it's not those like choppy, like one building has it and then the other side is bare, but to have like a overall theme. The pedestrian orientation section just encourages human scale design, and so that includes having weather protection through covered and recessed entryways, pedestrian scaled signage, incorporating balconies and decks, bay windows, and then having an open concept storefront. It also encourages any architectural elements and details to add a visual interest or promote an activity. So that includes the windows having climbing vines or planting beds, artwork, seating areas, or walk-up windows and service windows. The generally inappropriate section just discourages building materials that are generally considered inappropriate or incompatible with the downtown area and its character. So this would include vinyl siding, that's shown on the right. And then residential type wood siding, shingles, mirrored surfaces, and then imitation masonry and faux stone. It also discourages franchise architecture, so that would be those trademarked architectural buildings like Taco John's or Taco Bell. That's shown on here. With the next meetings, we're hoping to have a complete downtown square design guidelines for the commission to review. And that's where we are. I don't know if Charlie has.
No, the only thing I think I would add again is progress through this. I think we're kind of getting to a point, and obviously, hopefully at your next meeting, we can have the final packet of information together, but yeah, I think this is a really good summary of kind of what we're looking at as far as design guidelines for the square. And I think as we continue to look at these, it's going to help us through the grant process that we'll go through as well. But then again, I think it's going to act as a guide for other things that are going on as well. You know, Emily mentioned sidewalks and what goes on in those spaces. Obviously, I think the commission's aware, we do sidewalk use agreements. If anybody's putting any tables, chairs, closing any portion of the sidewalk for their business, and that gives us kind of a guide to then move forward when we're reviewing those sidewalk use agreements on what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. So. Yeah, like I said, I think, and we've said this many times through here, is just continue to stay very high level on this document, knowing that in the future, we plan to use this for years to come. Yeah, we have $125,000 of funding available this year to help do a, you know, as we've called it, the facade grant program. But again, I think it's something that we will continue to bring forward to council and look for possibly more funding in that in the future, especially if it's successful. But this guide in itself, I think, is going to be kind of that living document that continues every year after year after year on what this commission and what the city as a whole is really looking for in the downtown.
I think it looks good. I think my only feedback would be that, you know, that historic piece of it. And I was trying to think what the wording was that we came up with.
Did have some good wording for
We
that,
had-
but,
I think historic, sometimes people get hung up on it. And what was our word?
Go back and look at the notes on that, or you go back to the video, but yeah, I do remember that discussion that we had.
It was like more like keeping like, you know,
can't remember.
authentic.
Authentic, that's
Make it
what-
look authentic. We said
Yes.
historic, there seems to be a lot of emotions that come with that. And, you know,
Thank you
what
for-
is historic and what is not historic. The new look of the courthouse, I think that could be mimicked in some of the building fronts to pull everything together, and it means that it's a little bit more modern look, but it still looks good and it adds to the square. I don't think it should be excluded because it isn't historic. My 2 cents.
No, we'll go through, and I do remember that discussion, and thank you for bringing it up, but we'll kind of go through and maybe look at how often we use the word historic and just try to come up with a better term that isn't so controversial. In a sense, so. Great, yeah, I think, like I said, we'll, at your next meeting, I think, kind of bring the final document. I think we're pretty close to having it done right now. We just need to review it a little bit internally as well with finance, city manager's office and everything like that to make sure that we're on the right path, but we'll have that and then hopefully have council approve it right away in January, and we'll kick off the program after that, so. Thank you for your guidance on this. It's been a good 6 months, I think, 5-6 months that we've been kind of working through some of this stuff slowly, so really
Yeah.
appreciate the feedback.
I have a question on this outdoor seating. Is there something like, just thinking of, do people apply for it annually?
So the sidewalk use agreements that we have right now are renewed annually. So that, and Jackie's not back there anymore. I believe it's January typically that we go through there, but I'd have to double check with Jackie. So I think what our plan will be on that is if we can get these design guidelines kind of finalized, we'll present those when people are asking for those use agreements, because especially this year with all of the new sidewalks, I know we need to kind of update the parameters of them because they're usually on a square footage basis.
I was
And
gonna say, is it priority given to coffee shops, restaurants, and something, I mean, or what happens if everybody has outdoor seating?
I mean, from our standpoint, especially with what our
Or
code
just
says.
wants to set things out there?
Yeah, from what our code says, as long as there is that walkable path that you can still get through, really, we're not too terribly worried about it. And if everybody does it, great. But I think it's just getting that consistent theme and making sure, and Emily, you know, made a mention, like, for example, we don't want you to put folding chairs up because that's a cheaper
Right,
option to do that. Things like
Giving
that.
parameters,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, putting the parameters on it, making sure that we still have that continued walkable space for ADA reasons.
What's that space dimension?
Technically, our code, I think, says 5 feet, but ADA says 4 feet, so that's one thing that I do think we might have to take a look at and maybe narrowing our code down to meet that 4-foot requirement, because when we go to 5 feet, honestly, that 1 foot sometimes does take away a lot of opportunity for people, so. But we'll kind of see how that plays out.
When you guys talked about faux stone in there, what did you mean by that? Like, I guess there's some different definitions of faux stone, so I just wanted to.
Yeah, I think it's more so like, cause I was looking at like other facade, design guidelines and they had mentioned using faux stone, so it's like those very like thin, like it's made to look like stone, but it doesn't actually, and they're not really durable, so they just like weather.
Actually like a plastic sheeting.
Yeah.
Okay,
like,
so you
it's like-
don't mean like the, so there's structural stone and brick, and then there's some faux stone and brick that would be
Decorative.
decorative, and I mean, it is not, a lot of your highway buildings put that up, so I don't know if, that may confuse some people, I don't know. Like, you may get into the,
And we've got a glossary kind of terms that we have in there. Maybe that's something in the glossary that we can just better define so people do understand what we're talking about.
so like a lot of people's homes, like for instance, that have like, you know, the halfway up stone or over the,
There's different
archways
grades
or, yeah.
Isn't that
That,
untrue?
some of that would be
There's like
considered faux
different
stone.
tier
And we
level
have
of-
different, we have different classifications.
Yeah.
Because I think we'd probably link back to that,
Yeah.
so, because that typically works pretty well.
What's the city code? On the lit signs. I didn't know we had a code on that. Like, what is that?
So we're actually in the process of updating our sign code right now. We're in between planning and zoning commission and city council on that approval. We generally, and in the new code, I think, do we allow internally lit?
Like a neon sign?
Yeah. So what I'm saying here is for the like if you have a cabinet, so you have kind of that cabinet a sign and you have like that, I'm just the plastic covering on it and then the internal lit, and I'm trying to think of a good example of somebody who has that in town right now and I can't even think of it.
So, like our sports page building would have that.
So yours are, yeah, I guess I'm not sure what Sports Page has.
So it's like the lit box with the plastic.
Or you were saying Sports Page, I was thinking Brick House.
Yeah, brick houses.
Brick House doesn't have that, so, yeah, again, in our sign code, what it says is if you're putting up that new building, you would not be able to do something to that effect. You'd have to do something more what Brick House has, where you kind of have the sign on there and then you have the lights coming down and showing that. It really kind of promotes that type of signage over the signage that Brick House may, or excuse me, that Sports Page may currently have. But again, if you have it in place right now, we're not saying, the second this new sign code is adopted, get rid of it, you have to do something else. It kind of does allow you to continue to use what you have today.
Pella was always really strict on that, and like even you couldn't put a beer neon in your front in your windows, or there couldn't be a neon for open or closed. It was wooden sign you had to switch over.
I would say in our review of the sign code, we really kind of kept a lot of the same things that we have in our code today. There was a few things that we changed up, billboards, for example, trying to discourage a lot of billboards popping up in the middle of town and stuff like that. But, on the scale of really strict versus not strict, I think we're pretty much right in the middle. That's where we've always been, so. Okay.
Right. Brings us to comments. Does anybody have any comments?
I was just gonna ask, when does the Wander on Buxton presentation come back then?
So, and I'd have to double check where we're at currently on that one. I know Hometown Pride's been working on, they submitted after some feedback, I think that council gave them and the commission gave as well. I know they kind of have come forward with a lesser scale, I think, of what was originally presented. But I really don't know where they're at. I know that application process that they have, I think they find out towards the beginning of the year if they are approved for funding. And then from there, I think there'll be more presentations to kind of that final plan in place.
I think the North River art thing sounds really fun. I'm just having a hard time like connecting the dots in my head of how that would work. So like, say for the month of August, if this commission wants to move to do the fabric over the courthouse, if we could find the artist that would do the balloon fabric, how do we proceed with that? Is that something that we like ask for funding from the council because we've allotted this, or?
Yeah, my thought would be if that's something in particular that we'd want to do, it's starts with direction from you. I think we would then look at it to try to get a good idea of, what cost is gonna be involved, what do we have to go through to get the county to agree to it, approval process and all of that. And just bring a plan forward on that and figure out, how it's gonna get funded, what exactly that process is that we need to go through to get it put up, so.
So that's what council's approving is more just a plan with.
Yeah, I think, and
I
I'm,
understand what the,
so the North River's our plan, so we have that, we have our Arts Commission, another commission that the city has that I think kind of dictated a lot of that stuff in putting this plan together. I haven't been too involved in it, so I don't know too much background, but any plan is just that. It's kind of a plan and a guidance to kind of show what you can do and then work towards possibly some goals. And I think what Tava was saying was great. We're trying to stay somewhat high level right now and just kind of open some ideas on some opportunities that we have here in town for art. So I don't think it's saying anything in particular, like, you need to do this, you need to work towards this, you need to start committing funding towards this. It's just kind of starting to open that discussion on that.
remember who's all on that commission?
I can, give me 1 second, I can tell you. I know Bob's on there.
It'd be kind of fun to have the art commission come and maybe like show us some priorities of what they would do with the initiative and say, this is.
So they would be the ones that implement what this North River Arts Council does, or who does it? That's
Yeah,
what I'm
yeah.
Who
confused.
sort of wrangles it.
Yeah.
Right.
That it isn't just
Otherwise,
one.
I don't want it to go all over everywhere and not be
Right.
cohesive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's more, the Arts Commission, again, is really kind of managing that particular project right there. There's obviously pieces that affect the square, but maybe that's a good idea to see if
Does
we.
the art commission work with the Wonder on Buxton too?
They had the same presentation you did, and the same feedback on that. So maybe that is it. I mean, if there is an interest from the Downtown Square Commission, we could definitely try to get possibly a joint meeting set up with you and that group too, to maybe discuss priorities for the square in that sense, so.
It'd be nice to, so we don't have silos everywhere. It'd be nice to know what everybody does so that we're not stepping on toes and I don't know how much say we have it really anyway,
In the end, I mean, again, it's, this group is meant to make recommendations on what happens in the square up to council. So I think anything that is going to happen on the square, ultimately, the council wants it to go through this commission. So, you do have an arts commission that is working on an arts plan that does involve the square, but anything final that happens would need to at least come through this commission for a recommendation first.
And so far, they've voted down both things that we've recommended. Is that correct?
You're talking on the sidewalk use agreements? I mean, there was the
Or
one
on the-
sidewalk use agreement, I don't know what.
Street
other-
closures, I guess.
Are you talking those two street closures? And then the one, we didn't have a quorum, so technically it wasn't a really formal recommendation, but I think everybody watched. But, and I don't know what was recommended on that wasn't implemented. You're talking on
I
the
think just the timing on the holiday.
holiday one, yeah. And that was, I think what ultimately happened there, and one of the things we talked internally last week after that meeting was getting these applicants to come forward to this meeting as well in the future, because really what happened there is that group didn't come and present the reasons why they needed the time to close down the streets earlier. They then came to council after this group made the recommendation, explained all of that, and ultimately council said, okay, these, I don't want to speak for council, but I think, yes, this makes sense. It really explains why you need this time, so we're gonna grant the request.
So, Charlie, when we make the formal recommendations on things like this going forward, like, what does that look like? When, is it just a note to council that says, we recommend street be closed at 2:00? Do we, as a commission, need to, bullet point it out a little bit and say, this is our reasoning why we picked this apart, at 2:00, shops are closing, hair appointments are happening, football games are being played, do we need to bullet point out more and open our communication of, because I said, and honestly, I don't think any of us probably want to go sit and defend every point we have at a council meeting.
That's the point of the council appointing a commission, right?
Right.
Right.
Right. So how do we open our line of communication with the council without having to go sit in and,
Yeah, I mean, so, and from our standpoint, what it was is it was a recommendation, and I'm just gonna go to the holiday application. It was a recommendation of approval, except varying that time of closure. You know, I'm always, every council meeting, and the question did come up is exactly, you know, was everybody in agreement on that? Said yes, but there was a lot of discussion on it. What were the reasons for it? And I think we stayed pretty high level, was it was just, you know, agreement amongst the commission that there's a lot of businesses affected on this, and they thought this was the most appropriate time. So again, the council takes that, takes what the applicant is saying, and I think made their decision based off of that. But if we want to get more bullet pointed on to some of these recommendations that come forward, definitely, we can do that. That's not an issue. I will also say, I think, there's quite a few people on the council that watch these meetings. I do know that because I get feedback on what's going on and what's being discussed on these meetings. So.
It just would be nice, because then we feel like our time is beneficial and our discussions are valued, and I think it's important we work together.
Anything else? Record time.
I do have one question, and maybe you've already discussed it, but garbage cans, I know we've talked about it once, but can we bring the other ones back until new ones come?
Yeah, I emailed Charlie too. After the
Garbage all the
Halloween
time.
thing was pretty gross.
Yeah.
And I'll double check on that. I know the one on your block did finally show up, I believe, and it was supposed to be getting installed here sometime soon, if it hasn't been yet, so.
I haven't seen it yet,
That's the
but
one down there on the end, kind of by where, I think right in front of the zoo bar where that open area is there, there's gonna be one in that area. But then as far as alleys and stuff like that, if there's more that are needed, we'd have to add those in.
yeah, it would be nice to have one in the alley, because people just leave stuff everywhere, and they leave stuff on that bench right in front of me. Which just means they're out there, which is good, but
I know what you mean.
yeah,
I did a lot of cleanup the day after Halloween stuff and the witches and wine. I did
Yeah.
a lot of cleanup.
I did too.
Yeah, well, let us take a look at that. That's something I had on my notes anyways, because the garbage cans that were purchased as part of this project are in place right now, and if we need to start looking at additional ones that go in alleys and stuff like that, that's something that we'll need to do. But I know our thought process was to kind of assess how it is. You know, we previously had, I think, somewhere around 20 garbage cans around, and I know through our contract with Waste Management, they were even saying every time they come down, most of them don't have anything in them. So we were trying to get a really fine number of exactly how many garbage cans we need to be cost effective on our contract with Waste Management. If there are any areas that we see that, you know, we start seeing in excess of trash, please let us know, because we can kind of identify that and maybe look at some alternative areas that we can add to.
10 cups in a giant garbage can though is not gonna look like much. 10 cups on a sidewalk is gonna look nasty.
So maybe after an event, there needs to be a policy that that event has
That's part of,
Cleanup.
yeah, the
Yeah.
That is part of it,
X
yeah.
time.
Yeah, and I think the events that we have, one of the things that I know as a city we've stressed is the garbage cans that are there need to be emptied as part of that event, because a lot of those events do have, you know, some sort of auxiliary trash service that is being provided on them. And I speak for RVTV. I know we went around that night, we emptied every single one of them out just because then.
The amount of trash cans and recycling though that we had for that event was awesome.
Yes,
Are we gonna do that for the holiday thing coming up?
I don't know if they've got that planned or not. I would hope that they do, but again, I think that's when we get into
I can
these.
see lots of coffee cups and hot chocolate cups and stuff like that.
I can only speak for the alley by me, but that garbage can overflows.
Oh my gosh, all the time.
All the
right?
time.
All the time.
In fact, the,
I don't know what it was.
Elks asked me to bring it up too, because I talked to them and they said, what happened to our garbage can?
We'll get Parks to put one of the older ones back in that alley. I know we did take it out at one point this year with the project going on, just because it was not
Not getting
emptied.
cleaned up.
Well, and it was because again, Waste Management didn't have access to it because of the closure, so it was just, yeah, something that we had to get taken
The
care of.
other garbage can that's just like always full is the one that's outside the garage bar. Not just because that's a very popular bar, but I think because of everyone uses that Regions parking. You know, when you get out of your car and you empty your car from your snacks, your road snacks and your drinks, that trash can just always filled up, and now it's not there anymore, and now it's in Regions parking.
Take a look at that one. Yeah.
Growing pains.
When can we anticipate the alley and parking lot construction beginning?
Yeah, so, and we just got an update on that. One of the things that the contractor had been looking on with some different means and methods on getting utilities in the ground in the alleys, just because there's a lot of conflicts in there. There is a ton of utilities in there, and it's gonna be kind of painful project to do. They were hoping to do a method called pipe bursting, and do not ask me exactly what that means or what that looks like, cause I can't explain it, but essentially they follow the existing line of where those pipes are, and they put the new one in there, and I don't know the exact way that gets done. But anyways, there's some issues with our existing utilities. Again, when you get into existing utilities that are hundreds of years old, the sanitary lines are doing a lot of these through the alleys, which is not appropriate. You gotta get appropriate fall on sanitary lines, so they're not able to do that pipe bursting. That being said, they were hoping to start on an alley sometime here in December or January, because they thought they could do that. Now that they can, I think they've now looked at starting hopefully next March on doing the alley construction. So I think the south alley, last we discussed, will be the first one to go, and then they'll kind of work around in a clockwise direction after that. So we're also trying to kind of line it up, because one of the projects that we're also working on that's not part of our contract on the downtown construction is IMU putting all the electrical lines underground. So we're trying to kind of match up with IMU staff's availability, because they've got to do some things in the alley kind of once all of the concrete's out and the holes are opened up in the ground as well too. So
I mean, the big poles will like come down that are back there.
they should for the most part. I don't want to give you a definite answer on that. I know IMU's utilities will be taken off those poles, but in some situations, we've got other franchise utilities, Mediacom and CenturyLink, for example, or Lumen now, that have some stuff on those lines too. So we're also trying to work with them to get their stuff underground, but we don't have as much control over what they do that we do with IMU. So
Do you know if that means they come underground all the way to the backs of our building?
yeah, yep. So
Somehow they'll have to bust up some of the concrete behind our buildings.
then replace that, yes.
Yeah, if we could maybe know some timing, because I know on our south side there, some of us are talking about like maybe redoing parking lots back there. To coordinate that when everything's torn up, it'd be good to know everything's gonna be all.
Yeah, and I think
busted up.
again, the undergrounding of the electrical, for example, behind your building is going to take place. That's not part of the downtown project. So really next year is gonna be the downtown project doing the alleys, and those will be the 4 alleys behind the main portion of the square. So, excuse me, yours would be probably in 2024 at the earliest.
Okay, so another full year.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, so you'll have another full year before those happen. Really what IMU is doing, and they're putting conduit in the ground to essentially where they can pull electrical lines at some point in the future. So even next year, the utility lines and the utility poles in the alleys are still going to be there. What they're doing is they're putting the infrastructure in the ground, so when they're ready to pull those lines underground, they can do that. They have not, I think, had a exact schedule when that'll happen, but I would think, probably sometime 2024, 2025 is when that'll start happening.
So then when you do when an alley's finished, like say the south one's finished, and then at that time, is that when you try to brand or do something nice with that alley? Is that what the city would be looking at?
Yeah, I think at that point, once that construction's completed, that's when we'll start kind of looking at what we can do different with the alleys, especially those 3 pedestrian alleys that connect the square to the backside. So yeah, once that all gets done and you can kind of see what that look and feel is going to be like in that permanent infrastructure, I think that's where we can kind of start looking at, what different things do we do with those alleys?
That's so exciting. All those wires going away. It's gonna be such a major cleanup. That's huge.
Yeah.
It looks really nice through town. You don't have to see all
Yeah,
the
it does.
Mm-hmm.
telephone poles.
Yeah, and I mean, the best example I can get is the alley behind Regions Bank right here, and maybe you don't realize it, but there are no overhead electrical lines in that alley. They've been underground in that alley for quite some time, so yeah, it's really all gonna look like that, where you don't have to look at that.
Some trucks can barely get through because it's just a hot mess.
A lot of stuff going on in the alleys, that's for sure.
A lot of activity, good and bad. I'll leave it at that.
All right, anything else? Good motion to adjourn?
So move.
I'll second.
On favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Amazing if there was.
I like your socks.
I do too, I noticed that too.